Tā tātou irina.
Ka pai, tina no tātou katoa, waruirui a mai, i tine ki rangi a tāwhua nei 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 i tā koha mai a tātou atua. Whenui tātou, whakatō, 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 te whakaaro ho te tangata hei ora, hei, whakatō te kākono, hei puawai, hei ora, hei, whakatō te one one, hei korowaitia te tipua, hei, whakatoa ngā hua pai o te wā, hei, wihi wero haramai te toki, haumi e hui e, taiki. Tēnā no tātou katoa. Kua tatu mai nei i tēnei ki wā o te kaupapa. Puri noa ki taku tuakana hira, nau nei i whāriki hia i nei aho matua e pāna ki te kai o a tātou nei whānau whānui o te motu tira pia o Waikato. Neira te mihi mana hau ki au koutou. Koiri ngā wihi Barton tōku ingoa, he ringa raupa tēnei no taku iwi o Ngāti Rere Ahunga Te Mania Poto. So morena everybody, I just acknowledged my tuakana hira who has brought us all here today to kōrero about kai and how we can improve our kai systems and our micro macro food systems throughout our hapori. Very honoured to be here. Nō reira, tēnā koutou katoa. Hei a koe te wāhira.
Tēnā koutou, morena, morena, morena. I te tuatahi, tēnei te mihi nui, tēnei te mihi aroha ki a koe irana, kore te mutunga, kore mutunga te aroha ki a koe sis. Always lovely to see your face. Thank you for opening us up this morning. Ko waia hau, no taharo, no kawhia tōku pāpua, ko Ngāti Mahuta, te hauaru, te hapu, no whaingoro tōku māma, ko Poihakena ko Arumironga Marae, ko Ngāti Mahanga, ko Whanui Awhero, ngā hapu, nō reire he uri au o ngā tai o kupe. Ko Tainui te waka, ko Waikato te iwi, ko Pōtatau te whirawhira te tuatahi te tangata. Tēnā koutou katoa. Ko Hira Denton tōku ingoa. I am the project lead of the Waikato Kai Challenge. What that means, we'll get into shortly. I just wanted to take care of a few housekeeping things first. So, first and foremost, to let you all know that we will be recording this session. So it's currently on the record button, Harvey, and that's so that anyone who couldn't make it this morning can join us or can watch us back later on and get all the information about the Foodshed report. And that's what we're all here for, whānau. Today we are launching the Waikato Foodshed report, which looks at the kai that we're producing, what we actually need to produce, the potential of the areas we have to produce kai. But I'm going to let Nikki talk about that more because she's probably going to do a far better job of describing what it is. And how it works. Also, just a bit of a tikanga, let's all please stay on mute, whānau. Harvey will be ensuring that, but I know that that can sometimes slip, and then we can hear the tamariki and everything that's happening in the background. But let's try not to do that. And also, it would be lovely if we can see your lovely faces, if you're comfortable with keeping the cameras on so we can see who's all in the whare with us. So thank you for that. I don't think I missed anything out, but I'll just check my little checklist here. Oh, also, if you have any pārtai, please paste them in the chat or save them for the end. We'll have a Q&A session at the end of the webinar where we can sort of look at any pārtai you might have come up with from the speakers that we have this morning. So on that note, I'm just going to jump back into my little PowerPoint presentation and we can kick into it. So this is how it's going to run this morning. I'm going to provide a bit of a project background so that we can look into the different areas of what the Waikato Wellbeing Project is and how that led to the Waikato Kai Challenge. I'm going to give a bit of a historical Foodshed report of some sort, which actually looks at what was kai like back when my whānau turned up on the Tainui Waka in the Waikato region, and then how that changed with the settlement of Europeans and my other whānau coming over on other ships. Then we'll move into our speakers. We've got Nikki Bold with us from Whirika today. She is the author of our awesome report that we're talking about. She's going to talk more to some of the data that was highlighted from that process. And then we're lucky to have the lovely Moko Morris in the house this morning as well. And she's going to talk about kai motuhake and what that actually looks like in practice for our whānau and for us. And then, yes, like I said, we'll wrap up with some part-time questions at the end of the session. So sooner we crack into it, the sooner we get to that part. Right. So yeah, we are here to talk about the Waikato Foodshed report, and that pretty much looks at what is needed and what is produced. So there's all these beautiful facts and figures up there with some pretty as pictures. Thank you, Harvey, for our infographic that we're looking at the moment. But how did that come about? So that actually came about as part of the Waikato Wellbeing Project. Now, what that is, sorry, I'll just bring up my other notes. It's a research, knowledge, and storytelling project that's focusing on the environment and social equity within the Waikato. It's funded by the Well Energy, the Waikato Regional Council, Trust Waikato, and Mass Foundation. Part of what's fallen out of that is being the Waikato Kai Challenge, and that's seeking to reduce the extent of food insecurity across the Waikato region. How do we do that? We actually need to know what is the extent of food insecurity in this region, which has led to us producing some baseline reports. The first report was a want amongst plenty. And that was first, and that's how we're figuring out what is food insecurity. What does that look like for our whānau, our communities within the Waikato region? Some of the One of the highlights, I guess, or I guess maybe we call it a highlight, but I think one of the key things that came out of that report is that approximately 9 to 10% of households in the Waikato region face some sort of food insecurity. To put that into perspective, if you combine the households that are within the Taupo region and then the households within the Otorohanga region, that is the total amount of households within the Waikato that experience some sort of food insecurity. If you'd like to know more about the kōrero that's within their report, Harvey is going to place a link within the chat so that people can access that and read that further if they would like to, because there's a lot of data in there that's quite confronting, but it paints the picture of what's really being faced in this region. And then the other baseline report is obviously the Waikato Foodshed report, which we're going to talk about more today, and I'll leave that for Nikki. But another piece of mahi that I'm also doing within this is the lived experience, and that's telling the story behind the reports, what it's actually like for whānau that are dealing with the data, the facts, and the reality that's been surfaced through these reports. And these stories are going to be told by the people, the whānau, and the communities that are actually experiencing those impacts. And what we hope to do is reveal some innovations and solutions that might actually address the food insecurity that they're facing at the moment. Now, Pai, so that's the Waikato Wellbeing Project, that's the Kai Challenge, that's what's led us all to be here today. And so what I wanted to start with is take a look back. What was it like when my whānau first arrived on the Tainui Waka? How did they deal with food insecurity? What was the level of food insecurity? What did kai look like for my whānau back then? And on the right side. Are we seeing Te Iwi Waikato slide? I haven't skipped too far ahead. Ka pai. Right, so the Waikato region is actually the ancestral home of the Tainui tribes. So it descends from the whānau, my whānau, Ed's whānau, maybe some other whānau of the people in the whare that arrived on the Tainui Waka. The Waka was captained by Hoturoa and made its final landfall in the Kawhia Harbour. And from there, they established settlements along the harbours, rivers, and the wetlands of the Waikato region we know today. On reaching Kawhia, the first task of the Waikato people was to grow food. So Hoturoa pointed out all of the places for the plantations and the dwellings, and our whānau set about planting their gardens. The foods that were planted were brought over from Hawaii. So we had kumara, taro, and hue. Those were the crops that survived. Many were brought over from Kauai, and you can imagine some of the tropical places and all these beautiful ideas we had of coconuts and beautiful trees, and they came to Aotearoa and didn't survive. So what did survive was the kumara, the taro, and the hue. We also brought over. Oh, so these crops are actually cultivated in carefully selected locations, and they're usually in sunny, north-facing slopes with well-drained soils, often in communal gardens, and they range from about 0.5 hectare to 5 hectares. As well as these cultivated crops, we brought with us a Polynesian, the kiore, a Polynesian rat, which was used as a source of protein, and the kuri, which was used for food hunting and companionship. So alongside these cultivated foods and the stuff that came from our gardens, we also lived on wild foods. So we brought stuff over with us with the intention of growing it, but we also looked at the environment that was around us. And we knew how to work with and tune with the environment to hunt seasonally the animals that are around us. And those were birds, there was seafood, all sorts of fish and kai moana and shellfish. We had freshwater resources from our lakes, streams, rivers, but also our wetlands. Our wetlands teemed with things like tuna, piharo, inanga, different sorts of shellfish, even from the freshwater. And we also had wild plants. We gathered native ferns, berries, vines, fungi, and seeds. So you can obviously see there's a real sense of living from the environment. What did the environment provide, but also what we could grow from that environment. And one of the best accounts that I can have, which is an historical account, comes from this book, King Pōtato. And it tells the story of Pōtato before he became the Māori king, when he was the chief of the Waikato tribe. And they'd just finished a big battle, lots of battles actually, but directly after a battle in Ngāpuhi, he went to the Maniapoto lands to sort of rest and hide and revive. And here's a bit of a story about his times that I'm going to read directly from this book. The hapu or sub-tribes of the Maniapoto vied with one another in their contributions of varied foods from their tribal lands. Ririahu hapu from Marairo and Te Tiro at the headwaters of the Waipa and the Waimiha rivers brought the tender fronds of mamaku and in-season kaka and kiriru. Ngāti Paimate from Aorangi and Kahuwera on the Moko River brought berry fattened tui. Ngāti Te Kanoa, Kaputuhi, and other tribes from the Mangiti, a tributary of the Waipa, brought piharo. Ngāti Rungatirangi and Ngāti Wairoa and other Moko tribes brought from Awakino and Waikato, whike, koura, inanga, and all manner of shellfish. Succulent eels of all varieties were brought from every quarter, and there was no need for the Waikato Ariki to pine for the silver-bellied eels of his lake country, for these were caught in thousands from the Ngāti Matakore and other hapu in the waterways of the great Te Kawa swamps at the foot of the hill Kakepoku. So that gives a description of what the kai was like, and in abundance it was when it was being brought to a ceremony as special as being given to the ariki. There was such importance placed on that kai. So from there we move into the earlier Pākehā settlements. So from the 1920s onwards is when the traders and the missionaries and adventurers began arriving in the Waikato. And with them they brought new crops and different livestock. Now whānau were very quick to adopt and integrate these resources into the existing practices. So by the 1830s and the 1840s, Waikato Māori had transitioned into large-scale agricultural producers, and they were growing a vast variety. So we've moved from the taro, the kumara, and the hui, and we've moved into wheat, maize, oats, and barley. And we moved into more vegetables like those listed on the screen, and fruits, and even livestock, introducing more domestic pigs and dairy cows. So you can see there was a big change. We adapted and we took on these processes and we started rolling with it as well. So by the mid-19th century, Waikato became the granary of the Auckland province, supplying food not only to local markets, but also exporting nationally and overseas. So you can see there we already had a history of exporting the kai that was produced within our region, outside of our region for trade. So we had flour mills by the 1840s and the 1850s, Māori-owned flour mills dotted throughout the Waikato landscape, and there were estimated to be about 50 flour mills operating at peak production. The availability of processed flour allowed Māori to participate more competitively in the domestic and international markets. And it said by 1958 there were 51 ships were registered to Māori in the Auckland province, and 36 vessels were licensed to Māori traders. And these ships transported wheat, flour, potatoes, and flax to Auckland and international markets, further strengthening the Māori economy. As part of this was the Waikato River. I've skipped ahead, sorry. And I just had one more account to read, and this is the account of John Featon, who was a historian who travelled through. So he's a Pākehā historian who travelled up the Waikato River. And this is what he witnessed and wrote about in 1923. The quantities of maize, potatoes, flax, and pigs that the Waikato natives used to ship away and pour annually into the Auckland market would scarcely be credited. Sometimes cargoes of maize, wheat, potatoes, and flax were shipped direct from the Waikato to Sydney or other parts in schooners that used to cross the bar for that purpose. A number of these trading vessels were owned and manned by the men of the Tainui tribes. These were the Haislandes of the Waikato. Of money, they were never short. The Waikato heads provided them with abundance of fish, while the fresh water higher up the river, shoals of whitebait and the esculent eel were to be had for the trouble of getting. Their plantations were luxuriant with maize, wheat, potatoes, pumpkins, and kumara, and their gullies swarmed with wild pigs and not a few cattle. Perhaps no savage tribes that ever existed in any part of the globe had such an abundance of the good things of the world. So I think this account, from a definite worldview, captures the prosperity of the Waikato Māori at the time. They were self-sufficient, we were wealthy, and we were engaged in a thriving trade economy. But we know that changed. And we know a lot of the reasons why that changed, because despite this prosperity, the economic landscape changed dramatically in the late 1850s. There was land pressure as more settlers arrived in increasing numbers, and the demand for fertile land led to tensions between Māori and the colonial government. There was market competition with European farms and businesses. They began to outcompete Māori agricultural enterprises. And this led to colonial conflict with the Waikato land wars that took place in the 1863. And the subsequent land confiscation of vast areas of Māori land devastated the Waikato Māori communities and our agricultural economy. So by 1865, much of the Māori-owned agricultural infrastructure, including flour mills and trade networks, had been dismantled. And the once thriving Māori food production industry in Waikato was severely impacted. So I guess, whānau, that just really paints the picture of how things were. But a history of production and trade in Waikato reflects the resilience and the adaptability that were there. Before European contact, Māori had developed a sustainable and abundant food system, and it was rooted in our deep knowledge of the land and the waterways. When Pākehā arrived, we swiftly changed into new techniques and crops and trade practices, and we were able to achieve some remarkable economic success. But colonization and land confiscation has disrupted that prosperity, and it's reshaped the economic and social fabric of Waikato. So yeah, that sort of paints the picture of what was and what has happened, and kind of leads us into what present day picture is. And so I would like to soon hand over to Nikki to talk more about what that picture is. But keep this in mind, whānau, as we think about that. And then as we lead on to Moko's kōrero, which is going to look at, what is it going to be like? What are the potentials moving forward? We've taken a look back. Let's look at what is, and then later on, let's look into the future. So on that note, tēnā koutou katoa, I will hand over to Nikki now. Kia ora, Nikki. I'll just stop sharing this screen. Let you take over. See that?
Kia ora. Tēnā koutou katoa e te whānau. He mihi mai oha kia koutou. Ko Ilkley te Mauka, whakauruhau ki ahau. Ko Wolf te Awa, ko Yorkshire te Iwi. No e ka raki ahau engare, ko Otoputi tuku kaika inaine. He takata te tiriti ahau. Ko Nekibo tuku ihoa. Ikoa. No reira, tēnā koutou katoa. Kia ora, I'm Nikki. I work for an organisation called Whirika. We are based in Dunedin. We're a company of now 16 people who are all trying to make the world a better place. Our name has been gifted to us from our local iwi down here in Matagai. Otako have worked with us to give us the name, and it's around weaving a sustainable future together. And in that, what we're trying to do is we look at Aotearoa from 3 different perspectives. One of them is coming from the energy, carbon and waste space. One is from the biodiversity and restoration. And the third is from people and landscapes. And that really incorporates how we engage in food and what that actually means. So in 2016, we got a grant from the Ministry of Primary Industries to look at Otago and to look at what is grown in Otago and what happens to that food, where does it go, and what would we need in 2 different areas. So we looked at Dunedin Foodshed and Wānaka as a foodshed, and we looked at what would be needed to feed those 2 different townships, basically those what would be needed to feed those people living in those areas. So that's how we kicked this off. We created a template that we could try and help other communities do the same thing to get a baseline assessment of what is happening. And since then, we've worked with a really small district, which has only got 10,000 people living in. They came from a resilience perspective, so they feel very vulnerable in where they are located. And they wanted to understand a food shed and a food system in terms of what happens when there are major changes in the landscape, major events that might cut them off, and can they be more resilient? And through the work we did for them, despite them having a lot of red meat and dairy being grown in their area, 99.7% of their food had to be imported into their district because there was no processing. There was no meat processing, no dairy processing, and very few vegetables being grown in their area. But for them, coming at it from a resilience perspective, there is a big opportunity to work with their neighbours and other districts where there is processing and where there could be shared facilities, and then there definitely could be a lot more resilience through that. We also looked at a much larger region, which was 600,000 people. So it was regional. There was 11 districts in that. And that again came from so the first one came from a community organisation on food resilience. The second one was from a district health board, really coming at it from very similar to the Waikato Wellbeing Project from a food security angle, and really wanting to look at having enough food for everyone now. Now, with that work, we did quite a lot of looking at, again, with the food shed. And similarly, there's a lot of red meat and there's a lot of dairy. And the red meat is processed within their region, but the dairy wasn't. So despite the region being rather large, all the dairy had to leave the region prior to it either coming back or being exported. And so it's very complicated. The other really interesting one was pork. there was 5% of pork was from local farmers. 95% of the pork for them in that regional study came from overseas, not even around the country. It came from overseas, so international pork. And the one thing I learned through that project is be very careful when you're buying bacon, because it can be very subtle on it to say that it's from local and overseas. And that it'll say both of them on the packaging, which basically means it's from overseas. So that was that led us into the Waikato Wellbeing Project. That's how we got a foot in the door to do this piece of work. And I'll just run through a few of the statistics. So Hera, if you could just pull up your slide for me. So it was an incredibly, all of the work that I do, this, I'm such a data nerd. I love really getting into the data, and I'm not going to go into how we did it. And if you're interested, it's written all in the report. I am literally going to use Harvey's amazing diagram to just point out some of the key things, which as a baseline Foodshed, it really just starts to highlight what is happening for you in 2024. So Hera has given us a really amazing and slightly heartbreaking look at where we were, and this is looking at where we are. Heartbreaking because this is where we are now. And so out of the 2.5 million hectares worth of land within the Waikato region, 57% of that is used for food growing. So out of that 57%, there are 7 million tons of food grown. So 7 million tons, 6.5 million tons, that's 93% of that is milk. So milk is weighed as a ton. To be able to compare milk and dairy, there are a few calculations that we have to do, but it's just really important for you to get a sense of how much milk does come out of the region. It is quite incredible. It only uses 50% of that food producing land. So a cow can produce an incredible amount of milk. It's quite phenomenal. In the region, there is also a high percentage of red meat. So there's 51% of the land is used for red meat. So as you can see straight away, 46% of the land is dairy and 51% is for red meat. It doesn't leave a lot for everything else. And the figure on the right there shows that 0.4% of food producing land is for fruit, vegetables, nuts, and legumes. So 0.4% of the land. That's next to nothing, really. What we also discovered through this piece of work is the amount of chicken meat. So there is quite a substantial amount of, there's only a handful of farms, but chicken meat is incredibly high output. And that's because of the way we now farm chickens for meat. And it's very intensive, which produces a high output for a very small amount of land. But what isn't produced enough is, as I said, the legumes, nuts, fruit, grains. There's not enough grains. There is no grains recorded for human consumption. That all the grains that are produced are to feed the dairy cows. And there's not enough pork, and there's not enough aquaculture if we were to have a healthy diet. So looking at a healthy diet, you need about it's over half a ton of food per person per year to have and of a wide variety of different foods. When you extrapolate that out over the amount of people that are living in the Waikato, it's roughly 300,000 tons of food would be needed to feed those residents on an annual basis. And what we can see from what is grown, you'd need about 7% of the red meat production that currently exists to feed the population, and you'd need about 4% of the dairy. So when I said earlier, the conversion between milk and dairy, we kind of simplify it by saying a 1 to 4 factor. So that's 6.5 million tons of milk. You have to reduce that down to compare it to dairy. So you'd need about 4% of the current dairy to be able to feed the existing population. So the Foodshed is as I said, is a baseline. It gives a very detailed understanding of what would be needed to feed the population and what is currentently grown and recorded. And this data is as good as the data that we are given. So if you know that your neighbor actually grows grains and sells them to the local for oats, then it might be something we've missed because it's quite small scale. So it's very, very difficult for us to get into the small scale. So it is quite high level, the detail that we have to get into when we are looking at what is grown there. The thing that we didn't do for the Waikato Regional Foodshed is to look at the food system. So we don't know what's happening to the food. So we don't know where it's processed or how it's distributed and how it gets back to the consumers. But I will just touch back on something from the large regional work we did previously for another organization, because they were looking at it from the very similar perspective that you are in terms of food security. And I think the biggest misconception is that localizing food can make food cheaper. And unfortunately, that isn't actually the case. We have created a food system now that is very reliant on export, but also import, and very reliant on very large scale supply chains. So our supermarkets have those very large supply chains. They can purchase in bulk, they can purchase from industrialized farms, so massive scale farms that can focus on very specific products. And they do work on the economies of scale. They can import competition, so they can import foods like pork, like frozen vegetables and grains, which really competes then with anyone trying to do this on a local scale. And their supermarket pricing structure as well, they can do bulk deals, they can have corporate supply chain agreements, and they can lower prices artificially, which means for a food security perspective, trying to link local growers to local consumers is not straightforward. It's not straightforward. And this isn't for me to talk about more. I know you're going to be talking more about this, but I just wanted to highlight that we do have to be very mindful that a local grower has a lot of other costs that they have to think about. The best way we can support local growers is actually buy direct from local farms. We can buy seasonal abundance, and we can bulk buy and share that. So there are ways around it, and there's definitely things we can do. But we've created a bit of a beast for ourselves. We've moved into a food system that, in my personal opinion, is a bit of a beast, and trying to move that back now and trying to create food security for everybody it's a bigger scale, and but it has to come from the bottom, but it also, in my opinion, has to also come from the top. So I don't mean to be the bearer of really depressing news, but at the same time, I feel that's what I do this work for. I do a food shed to really highlight what is actually going on, so that it can be talked about, because I don't think we talk about it enough. And I don't think we look at it enough and say, this is contributing to food insecurity because we've created a food system that is so enormous that we are now forced into these particular channels. And so we have to talk about it so that we can change it. And I feel like that's why I do this work, is to get into the data, to give it back to you, to say, we've all got this problem. You're not alone. The Waikato is not alone. We are all in the very similar situation. And food insecurity is a massive problem for all of us. And together we can change it. But that's the only way, is together. So thank you very much for the opportunity as well to do this, because I've thoroughly enjoyed this piece of work. And it's been wonderful to be able to present that to you guys, and to hand it over now and say, let's try and make some positive change. Kia ora.
Kia, thank you so much for that, Nikki, in articulating that all of that technical data and everything so eloquently, and painting the picture for us and really giving us perspective on what does it all mean. So tēnā koe, Nikki, and now we're going to pass on to you. Please, Moko, take it away.
Morena koutou. He uri tāku no te taira whiti, no te tanga mahaki, no te atiawa hoki. Nikki, I really enjoyed that. Thank you so much. I could listen to you forever. It was really insightful, and I'm not really into the data, but I love how you've presented the data in a way that I can understand it, and also use it in some of the mahi that we're doing. So I really appreciate what you've done there. So thank you so much. I'm just trying to find where I can start my slideshow. Sorry, bear with me. Maybe I can't do that. Sorry, guys. Here we go. So first of all, I just want to thank everyone who's online today, and there's a lot of you in the room that have contributed to this. Tammy, I know you're online, so you've helped with a lot of these definitions. So mihi atu kia mō tō karakia, I tūtaki a koe I te rātou I te taha Nick Rosgrove kei Waikato, mihi atu kia koe e hoa. So when we started this Kai Motuhake journey, it was really looking at what informed, how did we get here? And so to be honest, at Korihi Kai, I got a little bit tired of having to have that conversation of, oh, well, actually prior to colonization and before people arrived here, this is what it looked like. And so we tried and put this into some kind of format. And originally it was going to be three journals, what was going on for our people before colonization, what happened during colonization, then looking at Te Ao Māori. So it's going to be 3, but then I got really hoha and was like, actually, I don't want to wait. Let's just go put the whole lot together and see where we go to. So when I spoke to Hida last week, the PowerPoint she delivered was the one I was going to deliver. So I had to rethink that and go, now what am I going to do? So Kai Motuhake is it's a big subject, and I guess if you're looking for a recipe, I don't have one, and because the problem with recipes, if you don't have that ingredient in the cupboard, then you can't do it. So it's best to give people tools, and so you can add your own little spice, and then you can work out where you start as to where you move from. So part-time I work for Korihi Kai Zero Hunger Collective. And we're in the process of bringing people together to join our collective so that we can commit to creating a food secure Aotearoa. The name Zero Hunger comes from the Sustainable Development Goals, and they came off the Millennium Goals. And so there's a lot of debate around, why do we subscribe to global goals? But for me personally, and in some of the mahi I've done, these are the only global goals we have. And so a lot of people, a lot of Indigenous people, a lot of member states, a lot of civil society fought really hard to get these goals together. And, you know, there's been, you'll say, oh, actually the rangatahi aren't there, or there's no spirituality. But the good thing with a framework is that that's all it is. It's just a framework. And so you get to develop it in the way you want to develop it that relates to your context. And just big shout out to Harvey, who's been guiding our process through the SDG Alliance. And Harvey's really good at giving us questions we haven't really asked ourselves, but also giving us permission to dig a bit deeper. So mahi atu ki a koe, Harvey. It's a little bit about zero hunger, and that's a really appalling statistic from 2016. And there are some more relevant ones, but I think that statistic from 10 years ago is appalling and still relevant to today. Sorry, that's a really bad slide that I've got there. But when you were talking, Nikki, about talking about a bit about export, I'm going to read this little one which you can't see, so I'll read it out. When was this? Shipping records indicate that 9,000 Irish calves were exported to England during 1847, and 4,500 vessels carrying food left the ports, while 400,000 Irish men and women starved. And so we have a kind of a long history of export around the world and in Aotearoa. We recognise that food insecurity is driven by systems, but experienced by our taiao and people. And we know, and I know I'm repeating this because I know that this is all stuff that you guys know, but I think it's really important when we're working with organisations or community groups or iwi or ourselves that we grapple with the definitions, because we have to define them ourselves so that we know where we're starting from. And so defining that together is often helpful. I like when I read the Waikato Wellbeing documents, it's really good how it's, because often people think it's just food that people need, but it's not. It's not food that people need. It's actually adequate housing and better living conditions, and the living wage. That's not our goal. That's just merely a starting point. So. I won't name the supermarket, but there's a prominent supermarket that's not paying the living wage, yet they're making quite a lot of money from everyday New Zealanders, and that's not fair. So Tammy, you did these definitions. Tammy's online, so mihi atu ki a koe, Tammy. Food insecurity. So it's interesting. We think often you hear, poor people have these poor problems, but it's not. No one chooses to be poor. And in the last year, we know that it's our frontline police officers, our nurses, and our teachers that are experiencing food poverty and food insecurity. And all of a sudden, it's not okay, but it's always been like that. But the people that we don't expect to experience poverty, food poverty, now they are. This is a paragraph taken from the Want Among Plenty document, and I really love how it links the role of food banks, but also how unaffordable housing and low paid jobs is something that we need to address to reduce food poverty. Won't read those out to you, I'll let you skim through those yourselves. And food dependency. So again, that comes back to, I absolutely agree that our food banks have a place and they're doing such an amazing job around the motu, but how do we move towards a more of a kai motuhake response while feeding those who are in immediate need right now? There's hundreds and hundreds of great food banks around the country that are doing such good work. So here's a definition of food security, and so it's really good to just grapple with that with our organisations and understand when we say food security, what does that actually mean, and how do we express that? I think what does kai mean? Well, kai is whatever brings you well-being, and so sometimes we get bogged down with definitions and we come up with novels, but actually it's really quite simple. And food sovereignty, of course, we can't have food sovereignty, Māori can't have food kai sovereignty without having land sovereignty, and so those two are incredibly linked and fraught with difficulty all the time. I think food justice is something that we don't really talk about a lot either, and so food justice is another form of kai motuhake where we're you know, looking at the power imbalances and addressing and controlling food that is fair and accessible. So one of the things, and Nikki touched on this, you know, what does your food system diagram look like? How many aspects of government are included in it, and where is iwi in these conversations? Here's a like typical system, and it was really, I really liked what you said, Nikki, about I guess if you think about New Zealand or Aotearoa, we're kind of local anyway. Like it's we can't produce all that food locally, like you said. It's difficult. And if we think of tribal boundaries, if we, you know, it's almost like reinstating native trade. And so particularly, so I'll use Otaki as an example. Otaki, Ngāti Tōrautira and Te Atiawa, that's from Kapiti all the way down to Wellington. So they are at Confederation boundaries. And so, you know, growing food for other iwi is a form of kaimotuhaki, when often, and Taranaki whānau will say this, they don't have any land. There is no land in Wellington for them to grow food. We're thinking about Indigenous, you know, changes according to season. So for, you know, Hauora, if we follow the flow of nature, then that restores us in terms of our on a cellular level. And that's always the best way to eat. So just again, referring back to you, Nikki, thank you. You know, these structures we created, and so we can deconstruct them as well. And so, yeah, thanks for bringing that to the conversation as well. Thinking about kaimotuhaki, I guess if you haven't, then it's a good start. It's a good place to start to read before you can have the food conversation or the kaimotuhaki conversation, because then like once you see it, you kind of can't unsee it. And then I guess the reason why I don't have like a 10-step of this is kaimotuhaki or this is what you need to do is because everyone's at different places. And so I guess it's a little bit like, it's like your sustainable journey. You might say I'm a 3, but you want to keep moving along. And it's a little bit like, you know how in organisations or departments you do like a first aid certificate. So it's kaimotuhaki is a little bit like that. So you don't just do it once and then, you know, it's finished. It's kind of a commitment to a long-term journey that we're constantly building on. Oh, I'll picture that. And it's also thinking about who in our food systems, or who are the people that we kind of don't like to be around, but we know we have to be around them, because those are the people that help inform our food systems journey. And it's not about changing people's mind at the forefront, but it's actually bringing them to the table so that we can understand which parts of the food system they represent and how we can kind of meet halfway. I've had to learn this. I'm still learning this because I'm very reluctant to get in those rooms. And I think you've all probably done it. We've all done it. We've gone somewhere and thought, I really would like to be in this room to learn, but I'm so nervous to go there. I don't feel like I should be in that room. But we put ourselves in these positions so that we can learn more, so that we can help educate each other and ourselves. Again, it is a long commitment and a long, slow process. And so the idea is that everything that moves us away from a food response and closer to a food secure community, like the Waikato Wellbeing Project and all the little fires that are happening, we don't have to have the answers right now. And often we burden ourselves with, you know, I need to know what to do next, or I need to know how we can move from this. But we just really need to have webinars like this where we can have different views in the room, and we can go, actually, I never actually thought about how can I make that work for me. It's also having it's also about transparency. So, you know, when you're seeing things that aren't quite right, how do we address that and also move closer together? And again, I want to keep repeating that, you know, once you see these things, you can't kind of unknow what you have learnt. Oops, that's a bad screenshot. So I really loved the theory of change, and I could follow that quite freely, and could see, the good thing was you can see yourself in that, and you can see how these changes and the raised awareness and the storytelling and the pūrākau contribute to the end goal. I'm just going to plug Wellington City Council for a minute here. So Wellington City Council took on the Hua Parakore framework in the Our Cities, Our Future strategy. And so, you know, I guess what I want to say is that organisations and local governments, they have the appetite to re-indigenize their systems and decolonise them. And so it's really brave and bold, and it's awesome when they go, actually, we're going to do this and take the community with them. Finally, I just want to kind of end by saying, you know, the best thing we can do is just kind of sit down and talk to each other and understand where people are at, so we can best support each other. And there's so much to learn, but together, you know, we can actually do it. And it's really, I've really enjoyed listening to the speakers this morning. And I wish I was in the Waikato, because I'd just be like harassing you guys all the time. You'd never be able to get rid of me. It's really informed some of my thinking, and appreciate the opportunity to have a kōrero. We're looking at kaimotuhaki and what we can do around the motu, like as workshops, and so reach out if you want to sign up for any of those. Ngā mihi kia koutou.
Oh, tēnā koe moko. Thank you for your kōrero as always. It's always awesome to just sit down and listen to you kōrero and share all those pearls of knowledge that you have. Yeah, really appreciate your time, mate, and take her up on that offer whānau. Like she said, she wants to start travelling out and around the motu and can deliver some wānanga. So we live in a virtual world, moko, so even though you're not here tinana in the Waikato, you're always more than welcome to just hit us up and spend time with us and annoy us as much as you want over email and through this virtual world that we live in. But I'm going to come down and see you soon. Ajo, I'll get down there and we can hang out and we can do some awesomeness in the same space. So whānau, that doesn't leave us with much time before 11 o'clock for any Q&A that we might have. I don't see anything in the chat, but if anyone did have any questions, now's the time to sort of speak up or forever hold your peace. Any pārtai, any feedback, anything at all from the floor, yeah, is more than welcome. Joe, kia ora, Joe.
Kia ora koutou. I just want to give appreciation for everything that was shared today. I've been madly scribbling in the corner, joining dots and thoughts and writing quotes, and I'm deeply grateful for the knowledge that was shared today and for the opportunity to be here. So, yeah, thank you, everybody.
Tēnā koe, Joe. Thank you. For those that don't know, that's my boss or one of my bosses, so that's a gold star for me. Thank you for that. Thank you for everyone that contributed. That's a tick right there, so I'm happy with that. Moko wants to know if you're in Wellington, Tammy. That's a pārtai that's in the chat. Kei pōna ke koe, kei whanganui a tara koe, Tammy. Yeah, ka poe.
Kia ora, everyone. Kia ora koutou. I had no idea I was actually going to take my mic off on mute. I snuck Moko a little kia ora. Nice to see you. Yeah, look, what beautiful kōrero. And I just really want to say my biggest takeout, even though I've got quite a few notes, because I'm actually going on an active radio show this weekend to have a kōrero about food security in the context of Aotearoa, which is actually pitched. It's called the Black House, and it's usually pitched to an African market. So this interesting kōrero about the different communities that are starting to step up and going, we're experiencing food insecurity. How do we address this? So I can very much say that we will be leaning into a lot of the discussions from a Te Ao Māori lens and some of the solutions being brought forth there. But Nikki, that comment you made about, and I'll sort of paraphrase and reword it, and so correct me if I'm wrong, but the whole position of potentially reducing the gap between farm to table can be more effective than actual localized growing. So I know in a lot of my discussions, we talk about circular economy, we talk about strengthening, those localized economies, because we do know we've had a government that's focused on sort of exporting and not so much nurturing localized. But that was a really powerful statement to take from me to go, actual fact, it's not just about growing locally. You know, it's the complexities of the system that's wrapped in that. And so yeah, you know, I know those two things, that reducing the gap between the gap to table, farm to table, reducing that, you know, and growing locally are part of the discussion. But I really, really love that brilliant piece of weaving those two threads together so eloquently to say, actually, it's not that simple as localized growing. So kei te pai, thank you so much for all that take out. Nice to see you too, Moko.
Kia ora, Tammy. Thank you for thriving when you were put on the spot. So pai te tūtaki ia virtually. Nice to meet you, and kia ora, thank you for your contribution. I don't think we have any more pātai whānau or anything, so I just wanted to wrap up and sort of just sum up what we've just been through. We've been through like a history where we looked at how we had abundance based on sustainability and that we were in tune with the environment. For different reasons, we've moved out of that state, and now we've created this system where we're actually dependent on kai that comes outside. But like Tammy said, it was really highlighted that the best way, well, maybe one of the best ways we can combat that, you know, at an actual level of what we can do on the grassroots level, is look for those local producers and buy directly from them, support them as much as we can, because we know what happens in between. What they produce and what comes to us. So if we can cut out some of those middlemen that are making all the profits, as Moko highlighted, with very low wages being paid, even though they're getting very, very high profits, you know, let's look at ways like that. Also wanted to thank Moko for your kōrero, providing some awesome definitions and understandings of what that means, but also painting the real picture as well, that there is no recipe. There's not the definite finished recipe, but I think what you did today was provided a lot of the ingredients and some of the method that can start to build that recipe that we can all cook together. And I think something you also both highlighted is that I think the most important thing we can do is continue to learn and educate ourselves about what's actually happening out there. Because the more we know, like Moko said, you can't unknow it. So, you know, once we know these things, we can start acting upon the things that we learn and that we're educating within. Things like hopefully the Waikato Wellbeing Project, the Waikato Kai Challenge will make that easier for whānau to access the education, the data, the statistics, all the stuff that's out there. And the whole goal of that whānau is to help you all with the mahi that you're doing in your areas. So please feel free to reach out to me if you have any more pātai about this or some amazing ideas how we can attack food security and we can re-indigenize and decolonize this food system that we've been talking about today. But on that note, thank you all for your time. Thank you all for your energy. And I'm going to hand over to my tino teina Irina to close us off for today. Tēnā koe.
Tēnā koutou katoa, I rere ana ngā aumihi kia koutou. Moko, awesome to see you online. It's been a while, Lewa. I just want to say thank you to everybody because I done my master's around kai rangatiratanga during COVID, and now I'm in the PhD phase of this mahi, and one of my kaupapas around kai onamata, inamata, anamata, and it was around about how we develop whānau-led micro food systems within our hapori. And so I just want to thank you all for, you know, it can get quite lonely when you think you're in it on your own, but it's not until you see other kai enthusiasts that it, you know, kua taka te kapa, there's light at the end of the tunnel. One thing I just want to quickly touch on is around, was awesome to hear around kōrero around the transmission of knowledge. And what we're currently doing is around re-engaging and reimagining kai, what our kai systems are in our hapu, and looking at the mana mauri of kai. And so taking it from a different perspective or a different lens. So I'm just going to leave you all with a whakatauki from Kingi Tāwhiao, and it was after the war when there wasn't a lot of kai, and the whakatauki goes like this. Māku anō I hanga I taku whare, ko tōna tāhuhu he hinau, ona pau he māhoi, he pātete. And so that whakatauki speaks on being resourceful in your hapori. And even though during the Waikato golden years, there was an abundance, once Waikato warfare hit, their kai systems changed. So, you know, me pakanga te pakanga, fight the fight. haioranga mo te tinana haioranga mo Apōpō. Nā reira, me noi tātou. Kia tau ngā manaakitanga kei runga i te whenua, kia tau ngā manaakitanga kei runga i ngā rangi tūhāha, kia tau hoki ngā huatanga o tēnei rangi a tāhua nei, nei tā koha mai a tātou nei atua. Pai marire ki runga, ki raro, ki roto, ki waho, hau, pai marire. Ngā mihi nui kia koutou. Have a beautiful day.
Tēnā koe, my sis. Thank you, whānau.